Thanks, Liam. As mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the research I've done on educators' use of humour in the classroom environment. Oh, if I can get slides to work, that'd be a good starting point. There we go. So just to give you, a little bit of background about me, and particularly because we're talking about humour in educational environments, kind of what my experience with that is. So, I've got a psychology background. I'm lecturing in psychology, which is what I did my PhD in, looking at humour in educational environments, so both secondary levels and also in higher education. But I've also got a range of different teaching experience. My master's is in teaching, right from teaching out in Thailand for 6 years, from year 7 to 10, but also at a range of different higher education institutions throughout my PhD into my current position at the University of Chester. So just to start, I guess thinking about what humour is, that's what we're talking about today. And the idea of humour hasn't always been how we see it in the modern day. So originally, humour was kind of seen as a temperament, a static state that we had. So the idea of the four humours or umas, so these liquids in the body that dictate our temperament and who we are. But kind of going through into the 15th and 16th century is when we kind of saw it changing into how we view it more today. So something that is a temporary state first talked about actually in Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew, where we discussed idle humour as a characteristic that somebody can have. And Freud has talked about everything, and he's also talked about humour and kind of defined it as either being an interaction between two people or an interaction where somebody is doing something and somebody else is observing it as being humorous. So this is what we're going to talk to, although I'm sure we all have our own experiences of what humour is and using humour ourselves. So just to start then kind of thinking about humour. So I originally began my research back in 2022 working on a scoping literature review. So looking at kind of, well, what do we already know about humour and how it's used, particularly in a secondary classroom environment, although, like I said, my later research goes into kind of higher education. So I looked at 4,733 abstracts to find papers that were looking at humour in secondary environments, whether that's focusing on the teacher or the student. Specifically empirical research from 1997, which is when like social media and things such as that became a bit more common and started to kind of develop, possibly leading to a shift in humour until 2022 when we completed the research in either English or Spanish, because these were the languages that the research team spoke. And from this, what we identified is that, humour is reported to have a real range of outcomes on students, both positive and negative. The main areas that we found is that it could affect the classroom environment, so creating either a really positive classroom environment, where students feel really welcome, or possibly creating a disruptive, less respectful classroom environment, so increase laughing, talking, shouting, general disruption, possibly even disturbing other classes outside of the one where humour is being used. Improved relationships was another positive that was discussed. So strengthening that student-teacher relationship, breaking down those barriers, but equally possibly leading to negative outcomes on that relationship. So students possibly becoming offended or having negative views of their teacher for using this humour in the classroom. And also, unsurprisingly, impacts on learning as well. So in some studies, it was found that it helps students with remembering important information for assessments and language tests, but equally possible confusion over what they should be learning, maybe not knowing where the joke begins and where it ends. So a real range of impacts. And one of the reasons for these different findings is possibly the kind of humour that's being used. So in these previous studies, it was kind of just looking at humour as this one big humour blob, one big category, rather than thinking about, okay, well, how exactly are we using this humour? And that's kind of where humour styles come into it. So it's been identified in the literature that there are a range of different humour styles that we use. One of the most common categorizations of these is Martin et al. So on the left here, so this was categorizing humor into 4 different categories. So we had 2 positive categories, so affiliative humor, which is any humor that's viewed as really positive, trying to build those relationships, quite a broad category really. So thinking about dad jokes and wit, and also self-enhancing humor. So humor that's being used for your own benefit to try and improve your own mood, deal with stress. So I don't know, maybe this is just a me problem, but if you've ever, made a mistake while teaching, walked into a wall, using that humor to kind of deal with that stress or that incident, whatever may have happened, to kind of manage your own feelings is self-enhancing humor. And then you've got 2 negative humor styles. So we've got aggressive humor, which is, teasing, sarcasm, that kind of, I was going to say more aggressive uses of humor where we're kind of, bantering with people, and also self-defeating humor. So humor at your own expense where you're putting yourself down, such as joking about walking into walls. Would be another aggressive humor style. So this was these 4 humor styles are used quite frequently within literature, but have also been identified within that classroom environment. But there are other categorizations here as well. So you'll see there's some kind of overlap, but also the main one here I want to kind of highlight is that course-related and course-unrelated humor. So whether humor is related to what is being taught. So are you making a pun to help students remember key terminology or a really important fact for an exam? Or are you using course unrelated humour, which would be a joke about an anecdote about something you did at the weekend that has absolutely no relevance to what you're trying to get your students to learn at all? So there's lots of different ways it can be categorized. There's also festive humor, which isn't highlighted here, but was also found within the findings of this study. So this is humor around holidays, special events. Think April Fool's pranks, Christmas puns, things such as that. So how was humor identified as being used? It was identified actually most teachers use humor, and students actually overall respond quite positively to the use of humor as well. Affiliative and course-related humors were kind of seen as being the most frequently used, whereas aggressive humor was seen as being the least frequently used kind of humor by teachers. And teachers talked about using it for a variety of reasons. So, helping their students, dealing with stress as well, but also for a really personal reason, like dealing with the tolls of teaching and the difficulties that kind of stresses that come along with it. So there was kind of that real mix of whether it's for the student, but also for themselves. So I talked about the importance of these different humour styles and possibly explaining those different mixed findings within the literature. And this was also found within the findings of this study. So there were some studies that were looking at these specific humour styles. So course-related humour, for example. So if teachers, were using humour around the content that they were teaching, it helped to increase those exam scores. But again, there was also that possible confusion of where does that joke start? Where does it end? Which bit am I meant to be taking from this joke? So even when we're looking at these specific humour styles, it's not necessarily as easy as, oh, well, this is a good humour style and this is a bad humour style. Aggressive humor, again, supporting positive relationships. It was also talked about being used by teachers for themselves, so using sarcasm, again, to kind of deal with that stress and that toll of teaching. But again, that increased opposition. Aggressive humor was reported to be one of the most mixed humor styles when it comes to students' responses. Some finding it really appropriate, others kind of feeling like this isn't this isn't necessary in the classroom, describing it as having disturbing content matter, and yeah, being quite negative about it as well. And then affiliative humour, actually, even though it's quite a broad category, when we think about positive humour, comes up very, very little in the literature. But when it does, it comes up pretty positively. Talking about engaging students with deeper thinking, and also creating that positive environment. But possibly because it is such a broad category, there's always that risk that it's being viewed as this kind of default humour style and kind of getting missed within these papers. So, you know, I've just talked about how important it is to understand these humour styles, and that kind of led me on from this kind of, okay, there are these humour styles, and it's really important that we understand them and can kind of figure out what humour is going to have positive outcomes or negative outcomes in the classroom. We then went on to develop some humour scales. So from that previous slide, I'm just going to go back. You can see there's such a mix of how we're defining humour within different studies. So we looked to kind of develop a scale that was more comprehensive of these humour styles and very specific to a teaching environment. Because Martin's scale, for example, the humour styles questionnaire, it's very widely used, but it looks at everyday humour. And if I'm asking teachers how to use humour with your friends, that might not be relevant to how they're using it in the classroom with their students. So we had a series of 3 different studies to develop this scale. Well, 2 scales actually. So looking at both secondary and a higher education environment. So we developed the 38-item teacher humour styles questionnaire, which was a 38-item scale with 8 different categories of humour. Due to some limitations in the amount of items that were included in each of those different subcategories, we then conducted a second follow-up study from this to strengthen this scale, which left us with the 42-item teacher humour styles questionnaire, which again identified these 8 humour styles that had been found in my previous study for secondary level teachers. And then we went on to validate this for a higher education environment, because obviously we didn't want to assume that that scale would be relevant for academics in higher education. So that's how we got the 24-item higher education humour styles questionnaire. So what these 2 scales identified, like I said, was 8 different humour styles, which are kind of reflective of those that have been identified in the literature with some key changes. So firstly, we've got that course-related and course-unrelated humour. I've got them in this separate circle over here to kind of identify that all humour is by nature going to be either in the classroom, going to be course related or course unrelated. It's either about what you're teaching or it's not. It could then be a variety of these other different humour styles. So they're not being used in isolation, they are being used in conjunction. So we've got that festive humour, that holiday-based humour. And then we've got on the right-hand side those humour styles that are identified within that humour styles questionnaire. So we've got affiliative humour, so that really positive dad joke-based humour. And we've got self-defeating humour, that humour where you're making jokes at your own expense. But we've also got enhancing humour, which is a variation on the self-enhancing humour. So rather than focusing on how teachers are using humour for their own well-being, it's also acknowledging they may be using it for their students' well-being. So if it's exam season, for example, their students are stressed, they've got a lot of pressure on, using humour to try and kind of alleviate some of that and improve their students' well-being. And then we've also kind of addressed that real mix of findings when it comes to aggressive humour by separating aggressive humour into 2 subcategories. Because in previous scales, aggressive humour is encompassing anything that may be, offensive topics possibly, or things about race, sexuality, stereotypes, but also light teasing and sarcasm are all kind of in the same bucket. We've kind of separated those out. So we've got sarcastic humour, which is sarcasm, teasing, banter. And then we've got personal characteristic humour, which is more focused on the topic that's being used. Sexuality, stereotypes, race, ethnicity. All of these kind of things are within that personal characteristic bubble. That's not necessarily to say it's used in an offensive way, but if it's covering those topics, it would be included within this category. So this is kind of what we've managed to get from this scale. And we kind of applied this then to look at individual differences in humour use. As I talked about before, when it came to research on how these different humour styles are being used, it's still not necessarily as simple as if I use course-related humour, it's going to have positive outcomes. There's something else going on there too, other factors that are influencing this, but also influencing why teachers are using humour, why I might use a lot of self-deprecation, whereas someone else might use a lot of affiliative and self-enhancing humour. So what we found here was that there were associations between different personality characteristics. So think about the Big Five personality scale, and the use of some of these different humour styles. So people's personality was dictating some of their humour choices or influencing, and also an association with age. So as secondary teachers increased in age, so did their use of sarcastic humour. We also found that men were using significantly more humour than women for course-unrelated, affiliative, sarcastic, and personal characteristic humour. So we find those individual differences were really important as to why teachers may be using humour. Obviously, not all of those humour styles are included for all of these, so there's possibly more that we're not seeing here, but it's giving that indication that, yeah, those individual characteristics are really important. Same for in higher education, less so, but we were still seeing the effect of individual differences. So for affiliative and personal characteristic humour, male academics were using more humour than female academics. And we also found associations with age and two of those personality traits, so conscientiousness and neuroticism, with use of those individual humour styles. It's also really interesting to note as well, we did a comparison between the secondary and higher education participants within this to see if that had, if the academic level had any impact. And we actually found that secondary teachers use significantly more of all of the different humour styles, except for self-deprecation, which was pretty even between secondary teachers and academics in higher education, which I thought was quite interesting. So I've kind of talked about how teachers are using humour and some of those individual differences, but we still don't really understand why. So that's kind of what we went on to look at is, well, why are we making humour choices in the classroom? So this was looking specifically at secondary levels. We did humour surveys with teachers, we did observations of their classes, and then we interviewed them and kind of informed those interviews based on their survey responses and the observation, so we could kind of discuss their responses and what we'd seen. And we found we developed 5 different themes which looked at why they were using humour in that classroom environment. So the first reason that teachers identified was being able to create a safe and productive environment. So I talked previously about improving a positive classroom environment, and this was kind of seen as a motivation for teachers. So they talked about, knowing the students as well. So this teacher here, so participant 3, they were talking about they know who they could make these jokes with. Their students understood that they were joking and they were creating that safe environment, even though the humour they were using maybe wasn't the most positive. It was quite sarcastic, maybe also specifically aimed at certain students, but it was done in a really considered way to make sure that it still created this fun, engaging environment for all of their students. Theme 2, so going beyond the curriculum to instill values and morals. So it wasn't just about getting content through to their students, but it's about helping them become positive members of society. So helping them to learn kind of what is right and what's wrong, even if that means actually the lack of humour being part of that. So in certain situations, not using humor because it's not appropriate, and they're showing students that this is not something we joke about. Theme three, so talking about building relationships with students, that as educators, our role goes beyond just helping them get a job and helping them to, pass an exam or an assessment, but it's actually a pastoral role as well, and that there is a duty of care there, and they're using that humour to help develop those relationships, develop those connections with students, and kind of really, yeah, relate to them and build that positive, yeah, dynamic. Um, Obviously, I can't talk about reasons why teachers use humor without talking about learning. So another one was to improve learning, increase understanding, making things more accessible and relatable for students, to help them to keep that information and, yeah, succeed academically as well. So this participant number 5 was talking about using, they were teaching drama, and that, yeah, even if they're maybe not doing something well, it's kind of helping stick it in their mind. There was a real kind of theme of those unusual events, those things that are a little bit out of the ordinary, they're a little bit different to our day to day. That's what's going to really stick with their students, and come exam time, that's what's going to be in their head when they're having to answer questions or complete an assessment. And finally, that kind of theme again of teachers using humour for themselves. It's not just about the student, but it is also, an active choice, whether that's for their own well-being, for their own enjoyment. This teacher here, participant 6, talked about a lack of funding in academia and a lack of resources, and actually using humour with their students as a way to kind of cope and deal with that difficult situation that they're in, where they maybe don't have what they need to help their students succeed. Other teachers also kind of reiterated this, and they talked about, maybe boring or dull situations such as exam time, where they're having to invigilate exams, and how, like between those things, using humor kind of just makes things more fun. It stops them going stir crazy. So there's that real kind of personal benefit to using humor from teachers. So kind of from this kind of leads into the more recent research that myself and my colleagues have been conducting. So there's that real kind of emphasis on those individual differences and the importance of, understanding those students, your own personal humor style, with those kind of like personality, age, gender that can kind of come into it. And so what we wanted to do was create a resource for academics, so specifically in higher education, that kind of thinks about why teachers are using humour and supports with that reflective use of humour. So what we did was we got funding from SADA to develop a humour toolkit, an academic humour toolkit. So this was co-created with a group of academics within the UK. So what we did was we had world cafes with both academics and also students to kind of represent that student voice, which is so important. And we asked them about what the barriers were to using humour in the classroom, what kind of resources they would want in a toolkit, why they would want to use humour. And we kind of took that away, and we developed this prototype toolkit, which we then unveiled in a focus group with some of those academics to get their feedback, which was then applied before piloting the toolkit around January of this year. So this was sent off to 44 academics to use within their teaching, but we also sent this off more widely to academics within the UK to get their feedback on what they thought of the toolkit, what suggestions they may have to improve it, any barriers to using it, which we've then applied to this final toolkit that we've got. So just to give you, I guess, an overview of what this looks like. So this is our toolkit. So like I said, it's a reflective tool that's meant to be used by academics in a way that fits them. So it's not you have to spend 30 minutes every day, here's a training video, but it's more pick it up as and when. If something doesn't resonate with you, if something doesn't feel useful for you, ignore it, leave it, have a look at something else within it. So, or adapt those activities. And the idea is to make academics maybe more aware of the research on humour, how humour can be used and how they're using humour, as well as their students, and really supporting the development of those relationships. So something that we've got in there is to kind of improve that understanding is we've got a selection of humour-based videos. So we've got informational videos that are talking about what humour is, why it's important, the different styles that I talked about with some examples to kind of help that understanding of what it is we're really talking about when we say humour styles, but also some anecdotal student experiences as well. So we got some students to film videos talking about personal experiences with academics, using humour, whether that's positive, negative, how they like humour being used. So we've got those in there too, because we thought it was really important to have some student voice and some student experiences incorporated too. And then we also have a range of different activities, again, that can be picked up by academics in a way that they think is useful for them or not, or adapted to fit their subject or modules that they're teaching. So these are really have two kind of purposes. Firstly, to kind of help with reflection of their own humour. So we've got peer observations, we've got activities that help identify their own and their students' humour styles with different variations based on how they may want to kind of use these. But we've also got activities to use in teaching. So we've got relationship building activities, icebreaker activities, because something that really came through in those World Cafes and the focus groups is that a barrier was that relationship with that students, not knowing what they might like, not having that strong relationship where you feel like it's okay to use that humour and have permission to use humour, but also this kind of feeling of a barrier between you and those students. So we were kind of trying to develop those activities that were asked for to help, strengthen that kind of acceptability of using humour, as well as a space for academics to share their own ideas of things they've used, things that maybe haven't gone very well, to kind of create a forever developing and growing resource of different ideas of everybody's activities. So what did we find then? So we shared this toolkit out and got that feedback, and something we found is that academics viewed this as a valuable and informative tool. So it created, it had useful guidance in there, it had some helpful activities, and a lot of information about how humour is used to kind of develop their understanding that they may not have had before. That it was clear and that it was an accessible resource. It was easy to navigate and understand. It was logically presented. And again, there were some positive kind of views on that dip in, dip out format. So obviously, I don't have to tell everyone here, academics are really busy. We have a lot to do. So, we didn't want it to be this thing where it becomes this 1 hour a week time constraint or something that honestly is just unrealistic. It's not going to happen. We want it to be something that people can pick up, have a look at for 5 minutes, and then put it down again for however long, and just really fit it around their schedule and what works for them, rather than becoming another tick box requirement. Which leads me into academic workload and practical constraints, because we are really busy. There is so much going on. There is so much, responsibilities that we have. So that was something that did come up, is that people just don't have any time. So trying to remember to consistently use it. They're already trying to get through those materials. So even if it is something that is flexible, that doesn't necessarily always mean that there's that time to kind of pick it up. So that's also really important to think about, something that we're also considering with this feedback and the toolkit as well. Something that was asked for and something that we're in the process of applying to this toolkit is the simplification and increased user-friendly interface. So we've already kind of applied some of this. There were a lot of links that went to Google Drives and more Google Drives, which we've now kind of integrated it into a more embedded system. Before we were sending it through email, which obviously your PowerPoint can only be so big before it won't send. But we've kind of uploaded this now onto a website with an more integrated system, so you're not having to open lots of links. But again, something we're hoping to develop further in the future is a smoother system and a more accessible interface, and also more examples as well, because we always want more teaching examples to help with those different subjects or modules that may need them. So that's also something that we're looking to apply from this. So where does this leave us now? This has led us to develop this tool, which people have been actually very positive about, had some really good feedback on. So we're kind of in the process still of making some changes based on this feedback. We're continuing to develop it over the next year, so that hopefully it can become a really valuable resource for academics who are interested in using humour in their teaching. And finding ways to disseminate it as well, so that those people who are interested do have access to this resource. So if you are interested, we do have a QR code here which will take you to a website where you can download a PowerPoint and a PDF version of this. But we're also looking to kind of look at that student perspective and that student voice even more. So a lot of the research that we've done is looking at, okay, well, why are academics using humour? How do they feel about it, without kind of going deep enough into what students feel and students' perspectives. So we're going to do some follow-on research looking at this, and specifically looking at neurodivergent populations, neurodivergent students, and their perspective and their experiences of academics' humour and these different humour styles in teaching. So yeah, thank you. Oh, I think you're muted, Liam.
Yep. Classic error. Yeah, so thank you very much. That was really brilliant. I will just stop the recording now and